What if one of the biggest climate wins isn't a new invention at all or the latest shiny tech solution, but simply making the resources we already have run more efficiently? Well, my guest today, he's the co-founder of a company called Adiona, and they're named after the Roman goddess of the return journey. And Richard joined me live from Sydney, Australia today, way after his bedtime, chaos with kids and all that stuff, but still found time to sit down and share his story with me. And it all felt like the perfect setup for a chat about bringing order to complex systems. So today we're going to talk about FlexOps, Adiona's approach to creating digital twins of operations so organisations can test scenarios before making expensive changes. And he will also explain why inefficiency is a hidden cost across industries and how human-centric AI can take the strain off workers rather than replace them, and how better modelling can help companies meet tough sustainability targets while still remaining profitable. And he will wash all this down with some real-world examples, from planning EV transitions to making supply chains more resilient when disruption inevitably hits. And we'll also look at what's next, from ground-based delivery robots to agentic AI systems that adapt on the fly. And just because this show is about people as much as technology, Richard will also share his go-to learning habits, maybe even a song for our Spotify playlist. But enough from me. Let me officially introduce you to Richard now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
I'm Richard Savoie, and I'm a co-founder of a company called Adiona. And Adiona is actually the Roman goddess of the return journey. We're a mobility efficiency company. We help logistics fleets or large companies with supply chains to be more efficient and reduce their emissions in the same technological stroke. It helps them reduce their costs while also improving the sustainability, generally by optimizing fleets, mobile workforces, and things like that.
Oh, I love it. And I love the story behind the name there as well. Did that name come to you straight away as another story behind the name and choosing that name? Anything that I've not heard there?
Oh, Neil, as is often the case with things like company names, it seems like an easy and obvious choice in retrospect, but the journey to get there was actually quite painful. And maybe something that your listeners would take away is that I'm an engineer by trade and by training, and I never really thought too much about marketing generally before I started my own business. So our marketing at the beginning was terrible. I had a much worse name. I had a bad logo. It was all just very cheap and cheerful. And it wasn't until later on when we started getting traction that I realized we need a serious name that has a story for us, some kind of connection and meaning. And it took us probably, a few weeks to go through lots of different options and eventually land on Adiona.
Love it. I knew there'd be a story there. And as you said, fast forward to present day, Adiona is helping logistics companies cut emissions and boost efficiency by leveraging AI. And every day on this podcast, I showcase a different story of how technology is transforming an industry, very often an industry that you don't associate with technology, which seems like a perfect segue into introducing people to FlexOps. So what is it, and what makes everything I just mentioned possible in practice?
Well, one thing that it wasn't obvious to me until we started this business is that to reduce emissions globally, one of the most effective tools we have in our global kit is optimizing the resources we already have. And I'll explain that really quickly and easily, which is if you look around at all of the delivery trucks, everything from small Amazon vans up to big B doubles and road trains and trailers and things like that, on average in the UK and in the US and here in Australia, they run about 40% empty on average. So there's a massive amount of inefficiency in those existing fleets today. And then if you think about the fact that transportation generally globally, is the second largest emitting sector. So when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, transportation is a massive road hog, figuratively and literally. pumping out lots of greenhouse gases, running 40% efficient, at 40% empty. And so if you can allow these companies to do more with the resources they already have, become more efficient, you can actually reduce the amount of emissions for the same amount of work. And that has a whole bevy of other flow-on improvements and benefits that we all get in terms of reducing congestion in cities, reducing smog, and just generally reducing the impact of supply chain resource constraints. And, there's a major labor and skills gap in supply chain, and that's something that we can address with this technology as well.
And I'm glad you mentioned supply chain there, because I think up until about 5 years ago, it's something we all just took for granted. The shelves were always full. And then when they weren't, there was a few bit of a wake-up call there. And the supply chain, as you just mentioned, faces a major labour and skills gap. So how does your idea of a humanistic AI support workers like drivers, dispatchers and warehouse staff rather than replace them? Because, again, big talking point now.
Yeah, and it's really important to us that everything we do really considers the end-to-end people in the chain, not just automating people out of jobs, but actually trying to make the people's lives in those jobs better. And so when you think about a courier out on the road, the first ride-along I ever did in a truck was with a guy who was routinely doing 11 and 12-hour days and hadn't been on a holiday in 3 years. And the reason he hadn't been on a holiday in 3 years is because his delivery route was so complicated, so unintuitive. And his truck was covered in Post-it notes with phone numbers and customer names and drop locations and all these little tidbits. He couldn't find anybody to cover for him, even in his own company. It was too complicated to get a casual driver to come and cover for him. And so those are the people that we feel can benefit the most from AI. In supply chain context, because automation can actually free them up to have more repeatable, routine work that is easier to do, makes more sense, allows them to work harder, be more efficient, make more money for the same amount of workload, and then also gives them an exit path. Because a lot of these people in warehouses and distribution centers and supply chain generally, a lot of the knowledge work that they do is in their head, and it's very hard to replace them. So using AI in a humanistic way allows us to create a transition phase for Industry 5.0 to take people who are really cycling out of the workforce. You mentioned the labor and skills gap, right? In the US alone, there's 450,000 manufacturing jobs that have gone unfilled for over 6 months. So as much as countries like America are talking about bringing manufacturing back, at the end of the day, nobody wants to do that work in developed economies anymore. So we need to automate them if we're going to keep the backbone of the economy, which is supply chain, running. And humanistic AI is one way to address that labor and skills gap, automate a lot of those things, and then improve the workforce life of the people that are still doing those types of jobs.
And I think you hit on a point there we don't talk about enough. A lot of these jobs are jobs that people just don't want to do anymore. And before you came on today, I was reading that FlexOps can run simulations in everything from EV fleet conversion to micro fulfillment planning. So just to bring that to life, though, are you able to share maybe a real world example of how a scenario modelling has reshaped operations for a customer? Is there any stories you can share? You don't have to name any names, but it'd be great to bring that to life, I think.
Oh, absolutely. We work with the Australia Post down here in Australia, and one of their challenges is around electrifying their fleet, both to save cost because electricity is cheaper than petrol, and also to reduce emissions. And then they also have these massive networks of pickup, drop-off, locker locations and post offices where you can get your parcels delivered to and pick them up. And we call those kind of, similar to a micro-fulfillment strategy where you have locations of inventory closer to the end consumer. All of these things are really complex. There's a huge number of variables when you have thousands of locations and millions of and billions of parcels and then thousands of vehicles and fleets. So having a simulation environment where you can actually turn all of those things into a digital twin, you can create a digital simulation environment that allows you to play out the scenario to see what is the cost to serve per parcel in a certain area or even in nationwide when you try to do these experiments of converting to EVs or changing the real estate locations or the pickup drop-off type scenarios that you have, offering new types of products to your customers and playing out those scenarios to see, well, how much should we charge to do a home delivery versus doing a pickup? Being able to simulate all that is really powerful for them. And it's a new thing that historically they've not been able to do efficiently because compute power was much lower before cloud. Now that we have cloud, we have a lot more compute power. And then because we have AI, we have parallelism that we can create, these efficiencies of scale inside of cloud compute to run all these different scenarios, create all these optimizations, and get realistic answers that really just hasn't been feasible before.
Incredibly cool what you're doing here. And if there is anybody listening from the industry, many logistics companies are struggling with inconsistent or incomplete data. And I'm curious, how does your technology handle messy data, unstructured data, while still delivering reliable insights? Because we all talk about AI, but of course it's data that is the new oil, and there's a lot of silos, a lot of unstructured data out there. So you're laughing knowingly there. So tell me more about that.
Well, I've also got a tidbit for your audience that they might enjoy, which is the failure story sometimes too. But when we first started, my co-founder is a PhD in operations research and AI, and with a specific focus on machine learning, and really, really expert in that field. And so our initial uses of AI back in 2020, when we started, were about normalizing incomplete and messy data. That was really where we saw the biggest impact of AI on what we do, is being able to take unstructured data from any given logistics company and normalize it to our formats and inject it into our system so that we can work with it, right? And we actually spent a lot of time and money on developing these deep learning AI models, pipeline models that could do that. And then, of course, 2022, 2023, OpenAI comes and basically blew it all away and said, oh, actually, these LLMs are so multi-purpose that they can kind of do that pretty well. And so now that's becoming almost par for the course, where our competitors and lots of companies are realizing that there's different ways that you can address inconsistent and incomplete data, but some of the biggest challenges in the extract, transform, load sectors, the ETL sectors, classic kind of industrial problem, are really solved by LLMs and then just customizing LLMs.
Love it. Brilliant example. And another area that we hear about more and more is sustainability goals. They're becoming the new business goals, especially when you throw ESG scores into the mix. So how do you see AI helping companies not only meet some of those challenging emission targets? So we've mentioned 2030 for quite a few years. That's getting closer and closer, but also stay profitable and competitive.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of markets in Europe and Australia and Canada, for instance, where sustainability reporting is becoming mandatory. It's part of your annual financial hygiene that you have to also report your metrics and your KPIs against your emissions reduction goals. And so anytime something is regulated into existence, it's a business opportunity as well. And because we are specializing in creating route plans and network designs and things like that for these logistics and delivery companies, we are also naturally calculating their emissions footprint as well. So it's the reporting and the measurement side of that activity being mandatory that allows us to then offer that as its own standalone product and say, you know what, even if you're not ready to change your network, you can use our digital twin to calculate your emissions. And emissions are broken into different scopes. You've got, scope 1, 2, and 3. Think about it. Scope 1 is your own emissions that you create. So if you run vehicles, if you have your own vans or trucks, those are your emissions, scope 1. But if you are a big manufacturer, say you're a Coca-Cola or a PepsiCo or Nestle, you often rely on third-party companies to run those vans and trucks for you. That's your scope 3 emissions. You still need to be responsible for those, and you need to report them to these regulators. So in our digital twin environment, we allow them to do all of that, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, measurement, modeling, and reporting. And then, of course, once they see and can understand their emissions footprint, we give them these optimization tools and EV fleet conversion tools and other tools that allow them to also then minimize it.
Now, before you joined me today, I was doing a little research on you, and I was reading that you've got a background as both a patent-holding engineer and a mentor in the medical device field. I feel like that's a podcast episode on its own, a future one maybe. But I'm curious, how did those experiences shape your approach to solving logistic challenges at Adiona? Are any synergies there?
Yeah, Neil, it's actually been really critical as to what our differentiation is in the market. Because when I first started in electrical engineering and medical device development, I'm a chatty guy. I really enjoy working with customers and working, at the application level. And so I was in hospitals. I was in surgery wards and operating theaters, talking with surgeons and watching them do surgeries with the devices that we were making and understanding really how they were used. And interestingly enough, in logistics and supply chain, it's a very similar thing where there's a big disconnect between the people who develop the technology, the engineers, the software developers, and the people actually using it in the field, the drivers, the couriers, the warehouse allocators and dispatchers. There's this massive moat between them. And unless you can roll up your sleeves and get in there and understand how to talk to those people and solve their problems directly, there'll always be a big gap. And so I think understanding how to do that in the medical device field really gave me a massive advantage moving into a similarly complicated field in understanding how to derive customer requirements into really good product. I think the other thing that's super critical is quality. We serve medium and large enterprise, right? We're working with Coca-Cola. We're working with PepsiCo. We're working with these big companies at the enterprise level. You need high quality solutions, whether it's software or hardware, that don't fail and they have massive uptime and they're reliable. That's the only way to deal with enterprise. And that's also something that I brought with me from medical devices because I was working on pacemakers and critical devices. And so when you bring that level of discipline and rigor and responsibility into any kind of field, suddenly you automatically differentiate from a lot of the lower quality, maybe shall we say, lower market types of solutions. And that's been a really instrumental thing for us.
I love what you're doing here. And if you were to look further ahead, look into my virtual crystal ball, what innovations or industry shifts do you think will have the biggest impact on things like sustainable urban delivery networks over the next 3 to 5 years? And I realise when I say that out loud how ludicrous it is because of the amount of changes we've seen in the last 5 years. But how do you see this evolving?
I think there's two major things that I'm keeping a close eye on. One is the convergence of AI and robotics. So Tesla being a great example where they're investing in bipedal and wheeled sidewalk level robots that can do last meter delivery. You can have a van or a truck that like pulls up through a neighborhood, but you can have a robot that literally gets out of that vehicle and delivers the parcel. No drones required, just something that's still ground-based, much more energy efficient. And that, I think, is something that's going to be coming towards reality in the next 5 to 10 years and will address the labor shortages. It'll address a lot of the other problems that we have in the market when it comes to costs to serve and also emissions efficiency. And then agentic AI, this advancement of AI models that can work together to collaboratively solve problems when you give them a target. We're already experimenting with that type of AI to solve problems, but also to get ahead of problems. So, for instance, a problem we're working on is a company in Canada where there are snowstorms disrupting the road network, obviously shutting down roads and accidents and things like that. Being able to actually dynamically redeploy your field services and your delivery services to maximize profit when there's disruption is something that's never really been achievable before. It's always been very reactive. Now it can be reactive and proactive, which is going to absolutely change the financial picture of how these supply chain businesses operate.
We're talking about the pace of change, what we've seen so far, what we see in the future. I've got to ask, as someone that's helping lead the way here, how do you self-educate? How do you keep up to speed with everything? Any tips or advice you can share there?
There's a lot of great resources out there. I mean, I'll call out a couple that I think everybody should be looking at. One is a newsletter called AI Valley. A lot of the innovations that we experiment with and start to incorporate into our own business workflows we get out of AI Valley, which I think is a really amazing resource. It does a great editorial job of combing through all of the kind of BS AI stuff out there and finding the really good stuff. Another resource that I love to use just as an entrepreneur is something called Blinkist. And Blinkist was, before the AI wave, I've been using it, but it condenses down business books into really editable kind of podcast type formats that you can then consume. Keeps you really focused on the relevant information and the stories from those books and those resources, which keeps the heart of it, but just condenses it down into a faster, easier to consume format for busy people. I still love to stop and read whole books. but I can only manage one at a time. But when I'm on the treadmill or I'm, in between meetings, I'm always just finding some cool things on Blinkists to learn more about sales, marketing, business, all the stuff that you need to be a whole entrepreneur and not just a technical person. I think I get a lot out of Blinkist.
All killer, no filler. I love it. Absolutely brilliant. And speaking of which, we do have a Spotify playlist here where I ask my guests to leave a song that's important to them. Maybe it's just your walk-on song before giving a keynote. Whatever it is, even if it's a guilty pleasure, what song would you like to add to our Spotify playlist?
The song I would like to add to your Spotify playlist is, I think, probably a recent obsession. Which is you're in the UK, right? So you might be familiar with the band Muse.
Yes.
Do you know Muse at all?
Yes. Yeah.
So they've got a new album coming out relatively soon, but the first single off of that is called Unraveling, and it's just a very cathartic song. It's something that I always have in my rotation. Muse Unraveling. I think everybody should give it a listen, especially if they like Muse. It's a bit of a divergence for them, but just a really exciting pump up song that you can't help but get both excited, but also introspective when you hear it.
Oh, I'm definitely going to add that and also give it a listen because I've not heard anything by Muse for a few years now, and that new release seems to have blindsided me. So I will get that added straight away and check that out. And for everyone listening, wanting to find out more information about Adiona, maybe contact you or your team, or just find out more about some of the research we mentioned today. Where's the best starting point for everything?
I encourage everyone to come and find me on LinkedIn. I've been an avid LinkedIn user since the very early days, and I'm very active there. And of course, from there, you can then go and find the Adiona website and all the other stuff related to our business. But come and say hi to me, actually, person to person, shoot me a message, give me a connection request if you're in a relevant field or whatever. But Richard Savoie on LinkedIn, Savoie, come and find me.
Well, absolutely love chatting with you today. We've covered a lot around, how technology is helping, or how you're using technology to help logistic companies cut emissions, boost efficiency, some real-world cases from real-world use cases with AI there, but also continuous learning, great music. I think this one had it all. So thank you for sharing your story today.
Thanks for having me, Neil. Love the podcast. I really appreciate you having me on.
What a powerful reminder there that efficiency isn't just about saving money. It's about cutting waste and giving people more sustainable ways to work. And this lesson applies whether you're running logistics, healthcare, retail, or in fact in any industry, especially when resources are particularly stretched. And I think the advice from Richard there is start by modelling what you already have, measure the impact, and then use AI to make changes that truly stick. And for everyone listening, where do you see inefficiency hiding in your world? Is it data? Is it your workflows? Or how your people's time is being used? Share your thoughts with me. Love to hear your perspective. techblogwriter@outlook.com, techtalksnetwork.com, @NeilC. on all social channels. Nice and easy to find. But that's it for today. So big thank you to Richard for taking the time, for spending 30 minutes with me during his downtime when everybody had gone to bed and his house was in peace and quiet. I really respect that rather than just sit watching TV, he decided to share his story. So kudos to Richard, and kudos to each and every one of you for tuning in every single day. Speak to you all soon. Bye for now.